Greetings, friend. Welcome to another message from the wilderness. We're going to be looking at a couple of short passages in 1 Peter this time. Short but important. These passages that we're examining help us to see the great importance that God has placed on faith, love, and good works in the lives of Christians. The Spirit speaks very clearly on these things, faith, love, and good works, throughout the New Testament, from Matthew through Revelation. This time we're going to be looking at 1 Peter 1, verse 17, and 1 Peter 2, verses 11 and 12. I'm just going to go ahead and read both of these together. Think about what is being said here, and think about the impact that this behavior has on those round about and upon the one who is called upon to do these things. 1 Peter 1:17. If you call on him as Father, who, without respect of persons, judges according to each man's work, pass the time of your living as foreigners here in reverent fear. Now 1 Peter 2:11 and 12. Beloved, I beg you as foreigners and pilgrims to abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul, having good behavior among the nations. So, in that of which they speak against you as evildoers, they may, by your good works, which they see, glorify God in the day of visitation. Obviously, Peter is writing to Christians, and these are Christians who have come out mostly from a background of Judaism. What he tells us here, though, applies to all Christians. And it's important to understand that we shouldn't be too at home in this world, and certainly when we are trying to live a Christ-like life, we are not going to be welcomed and treated as those who are at home in this world, because the world, for the most part, doesn't like Christianity as it is practiced in the New Testament. And that's why Peter here is, in one way, giving advice, and the Spirit is telling us what we can do to try to avoid being persecuted out of ignorance. But he says that God is not going to be prejudiced. He's going to judge the rich and the poor, the slave and the free, the Jew and the Gentile, those who have become Christians, the same. And he's going to base this judgment on each man's work, each person's work. Well, that says a lot right there. It shows that we as Christians need to have work going on. And we get a little clearer picture of that as we get into the next passage. But he tells us here to pass our time living as foreigners. We're just passing through in this life. We have our eyes fixed on Jesus and are trying to live in accordance with his will. And he continues his thought in the next passage. Beloved, I beg you as foreigners and pilgrims to abstain from fleshly lusts. We know that John says that the problems in this life stem from the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eye, and the pride of life. This encompasses much that is in the culture that Peter is writing about, and it encompasses much that it is in our culture of this very day, because these things really have not changed. Unfortunately, people have continued to be focused on the flesh, the comforts of the flesh, the things that are pleasing to the eye and impressive, the things that lead to power, and the things that cause people to look down upon other people. These fleshly lusts are not just limited to sexual lusts. Far from it. That's a whole other study in itself. But these things we're told war against the soul. He says to have good behavior among the nations, and that is the Gentile world. And at this point, the church was in a great minority, and they were amongst the nations. This is very familiar to a Jew, because the Jews and the Gentiles were, of course, separate. Jews lived among the nations, but they viewed Gentiles in a very different light than they viewed one another. So he says, you need to have good behavior. You need to do Christian things while you are living among the nations. So, in that of which they speak against you as evildoers, and this is certainly historical, in that the pagans viewed Christians, because they had been given a bunch of false information and lies about them, as evildoers. They were atheists. They might have been cannibals. They were sexually immoral. A very interesting study also on its own. But they would speak against Christians because they weren't personally familiar with what Christians did in their services together and when they had their assemblies. But, he says, if you are practicing good behavior, it says, they might say things about you as evildoers, but they may by your good works, which they see. So these are things that would be practiced every day for everyone, fellow Christians and also those who were not Christians. And this is also historically vouched to. The fact that Christians were known for loving one another and for taking care of one another, and also for taking even care of pagans. They may by your good works, which they see, glorify God in the day of visitation. So this is a good way to avoid persecution, which is based on ignorance. That is to be a good citizen, a good father, a good teacher, a good mechanic, a good taxi driver, a good whatever you are. Do good and be honest and fair and caring and loving. In other words, be Christians out in the world. Be light in the darkness. And by doing that, there's a good chance that you will avoid much trouble. That doesn't always work, unfortunately. It should. We need to be doing good, as is said here, in a visible way. We need to be showing by our good works that there is nothing to fear from us. How sad it is when Christians, because of bad behavior, bring shame and reproach upon the name Christian. I can't believe that God is going to let that slide. We'll say goodbye for this time, and we will look at some passages once again in 1 Peter next time. But goodbye for now.